Good afternoon, everyone. Today is December the 3rd. This is Salina City Commission meeting. Would the clerk please call the meeting to order?
Mayor Jennings.
Here.
Commissioner Angel.
Here.
Commissioner Crawford.
Here.
Commissioner Householder.
Here.
Commissioner Shirley.
Here.
Would those that are able please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Start our meeting with the citizens forum at this point in time. If there's any citizens that have any issues or items to bring before the commission that are not a part of today's agenda, please come forward, state your name and your address, and please come forward.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Lovins. I do live at 1215 Stratford Drive.
Could you pull the microphone down a little bit, and then I'll have you start over, just so everybody at home catches your...
Thank you. My name is Carolyn Lovins. I do live at 1215 Stratford Drive here in Salina. I am the one that put the handouts on your tables. I am here, and I would like to follow up with Childhood Cancer Awareness Month and invite everyone to our benefit of Beating All Odds 2. It is on Sunday, December the 9th at 5 p.m. We're having it at Blacksmith Country Bar at 1700 West Beverly Drive for Ava McCulloch. You may recognize her from the billboards that have been around town in September during Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. She has parents of James and Chelsea McCulloch. They do live in Fallon. And Ava's been fighting a brain cancer since May 28th of 2011. She's underwent 17 surgeries, 33 radiation treatments, and is now on her second round of chemotherapy. Each round consists of a cycle. During this round, she will have 12 cycles, one a month for a year. All of her treatments are in Kansas City, Missouri, at the Children's Mercy Hospital. We will have music, refreshments, and a silent auction to help raise money to go towards Ava's needs. It would mean a lot to us if anyone could make it, and we just wanted to extend an invite to the commission, the mayor, staff, and anyone else that would like to come. I do want to thank you for your time and letting me speak today. I hope to see some of you there.
Thank you very much. And again, that was December 9th from 5 to 9 at Blacksmith Country Bar.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other citizens? Seeing none today, we do not have any awards and proclamations, nor do we have any public hearings. That'll move us into the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of November 26, 2012. Item 6.2, resolution number 126948, amending the City of Salina Shared Vision Statement and Strategic Plan.
Are there any items that a commissioner wishes to pull from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I move at this time we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Today we do not have any development business, so that'll move us into administration.
Item 8.1, reconsideration of second reading of ordinance number 10666 to clarify the portion vacated of the east-west utility easement located 520 feet north of Magnolia Road on Lot 1, Block 1 in the Magnolia Hills Addition.
Mr. Hobby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mayor and Commissioners, we bring to you a reconsideration of a second reading of an ordinance 12-10666, which happened just a few weeks ago. We have found there is an error between the discrepancy between the first sentence and the last sentence. We want to make sure that the proper legal description for the vacation has been taken care of. So we'd ask for you to reconsider the passage ordinance of 12-10666 on second reading to include the Section 3 order of vacation to include the west 70 feet of the 20-foot easement in this particular property. We'd be more than glad to stand for any questions.
Any questions of staff? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Bankston, you need a motion to reconsider and then a motion to approve on second reading?
Yes, Commissioner, I think that would be the best sequence. The unique circumstance here, and maybe just a brief explanation. Once we recognized the error, it was between second reading last meeting and publication. We couldn't go forward with publication under those circumstances because that would put in effect the larger vacation, and simply amending that ordinance would not have unvacated, if you will, that area.
So, I'm sorry.
Attorney-client privilege.
So two motions.
Two motions should take care of the situation.
Let's see if I can get this right. Mayor, I move that we reconsider passage of ordinance number 12-10666 to include the west 70 feet, which is language that was omitted on the prior second reading.
Second.
Motion is second for reconsideration of the ordinance on second reading. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion carries 5-0.
Mayor, I move that we approve on second reading ordinance 12-10666, which would include the amended language, the west 70 feet.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve on second reading ordinance number 12-10666 with the language amended with the west 70 feet. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Angel?
Aye.
Commissioner Crawford?
Aye.
Commissioner Householder?
Aye.
Commissioner Shirley?
Aye.
Mayor Jennings.
Aye. That motion carries 5-0.
Item 8.2, second reading ordinance number 10667, amending Chapter 42, Article 6, Division 10.2 the Salina Code pertaining to the Public Use District.
So ordinance number 12-10667 was passed on first reading in the meeting on November 26th. Since that time, there have been no comments received. Is there any public comment at this time?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, when I saw that was passed on first, Sandra Hernandez, 1940 Starlight Drive. When I saw that was passed on the first reading, I was a bit surprised. The reason being is that there was a discussion that took place between Mr. Bankston and myself regarding the conflict of interest. I reviewed the video, and the video, in my opinion, was not reflective accurately of the minutes. The actual minutes was very vague to the conversation that I had with Mr. Bankston, but yet I felt that the content of that discussion was very pertinent to the passing of this ordinance. Mr. Bankston, he said that he had, Mr. Bankston said that Mr. Hernandez, and this is not what appeared in the minutes, but this is what I was able to dictate from the minutes. Now, I don't have to go into this if the commission would want to review that video themselves. I did request permission for a portion of that video to be viewed, but Mr. France said that I received an email from him, and he said that that is something that would need to be determined by the commission themselves if they were wanting to compare the two, the actual minutes to what was said in the video.
And I think you can go ahead and give us what your concerns are with the minutes or the meeting video that you aired, and then we can speak with staff and hear from staff.
Okay, I appreciate
The
that.
key thing is just understanding whatever the actual concern is.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Bankston said in the actual video that Mr. Hernandez's research on applicable state law was right on. It's correct in terms of substantial interest, and his understanding, in the words that was my understanding, speaking from Mr. Bankston, is that Mr. Mike Sell's interest in his sign company would fall within the definition of substantial interest. The the actual question at hand was there a possible conflict of interest which would negate the vote that Mike Sell took part in approving the amendment to the signage. Mr. Bingston answered my question regarding Mr. Mike Sell's vote on the amendment to the sign regulations. Did Mike Sell's vote count? He said even if you would assume he did have a conflict of interest, that would simply disqualify his vote. Had he abstained the vote, it would have been 4-0, so you would still have the affirmative recommendation of the Planning Commission. So it would seem that the outcome was not affected by the circumstance. Well, this would be incorrect. Based on the findings of Mr. Andrew at the April 3rd, 2012 meeting, a quorum for a zoning change is based on the number of members of the board, and the amendment would not have been adopted at that time. I have exactly what Mr. Andrews said. The April 3rd meeting says Mr. Andrews stated, and these are directly from the minutes, that the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on a draft sign code amendment of the Public Use District at the March 20th meeting. He stated that a quorum was present at the meeting and voted 3-1, Kennedy abstaining, to recommend approval of staff's draft text amendment. However, under further review of the Kansas Planning and Zoning Enabling Act, staff determined that a zoning code amendment must be recommended for approval by a majority of the membership of the commission and not just a majority of those present and voting. Mr. Andrews stated that the Planning Commission must reconsider application Z12-1. That's the same thing that I am asking, that if it didn't pass with a quorum then, under the same conditions, we're still talking about a zoning amendment, it would not have passed the second time either. So it cannot be considered for amendment if it shouldn't have passed in the first place. And that's just on the conflict of interest. The other one would be on surfacing.
Okay. Thank you.
Does he want to, does the staff have anything to say to me? If not, I would like to address the surfacing.
Yeah, I can ask staff. I think the clarity of the commission is what should be asked of staff. If any of the commission members are unclear as to when they would need to report a substantial interest and what governs a substantial interest, whether it's actual monetary contract value, which was part of the discussion then, versus the community art and design having somebody that owns an art studio that talks about art policy and ordinances. So trying to separate those two out into a conflict of interest. So Mr. Bingston, please feel free to, but I'd prefer that the commission would ask where there's unclarity in this situation. I think I understand Ms. Hernandez saying that if Mr. Mike Sell wasn't involved, it may not have actually led to a quorum, but the vote we're discussing was based upon that quorum, and the issue was whether or not there was a substantial interest in the outcome by Mr. Mike Sell. Is that correct?
Generally, I think that is correct, Mayor, and if it is the Mayor and Commissioner's wish, I had the benefit of being aware that Mrs. Hernandez had a question about what we had talked about, and I'm certainly prepared to address her question and anyone else's about that whole series of events, if that would be helpful.
Certainly.
I guess my only thought is, we had discussed, if memory serves me correctly, that if Mr. Meixel announced that he did own this, that basically satisfied Kansas law.
Yes, I certainly wanted to give credit where credit was due as far as Mr. Hernandez's research. He was correctly looking to state law related to local government ethics and the matter of whether or not one has a substantial interest. Mr. Mike Sell has what would be a substantial interest in his sign company. you might recall, I went through some of the details as to his circumstances, and that disclosure is one of the available means to address such a conflict, unless one is dealing directly with a specific contract for a sign or something along that line. So while Mr. Hernandez was correct in terms of where he was researching and his reference to substantial interest, whether it be by abstention or by disclosure, that is the means of addressing, either means are available in terms of addressing that. I tried to go to the point, however, where that seemed somewhat academic in the circumstances because of the vote. Now, Mrs. Hernandez is pointing out something that if she, as she looked at that information and the blue sheet that she cited, I can understand why there is some confusion as I looked back at that as well. And when we spoke before, I was unfamiliar with precisely what had occurred in the first Planning Commission meeting. I was not there, but in the meantime did have a chance to look at that tape as well. In that setting, there were 5 members present. So in that first meeting, we did have a quorum. And as it turned out, Mr. Kennedy abstained, and there was one no vote. So you ended up with a 3 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstaining. And at the close of the meeting, that recommendation stood. I don't believe Mr. Andrew is here. Am I correct? I'll speak for him briefly. I also viewed the tape as well from the following Planning Commission meeting, where I believe, as Mrs. Hernandez points out, the point was made, as I understand from Mr. Andrew, he had gone back to the statute and determined that the vote of 5 members, a majority of the full membership, was necessary in order to make that affirmative recommendation. That is incorrect, and the controlling statute is KSA 12-757. If you'll bear with me for a moment, I think it's fairly clear as to why there was some confusion. The statute is confusing in a certain respect, in that it says, except as provided in subsection G and unless otherwise provided by this act, the procedure for the consideration and adoption of any proposed amendment shall be in the same manner as that required for the consideration and adoption of the original zoning regulations. So it speaks to that process. Now that statute to which it is referring, if the City Commission were for the first time enacting zoning regulations for the City of Salina, as would have occurred however many decades ago, then in order for the Planning Commission to make that recommendation, that would have required a majority of the entire membership. But the statute 12-757 that speaks to what is required now in terms of considering an amendment indicates, it goes on to say, and this is short, a majority of the members of the Planning Commission present and voting at the hearing shall be required to recommend approval or denial of the amendment to the governing body. So in that there was a quorum of 5, a majority of those 5 is obviously 3. So you did have, at that point in time, a valid affirmative recommendation from the Planning Commission. The process of it being reviewed, and as may have been noted in that second meeting, there were a couple of clarifications made. It did advance to yet another vote, and that was where the 5-0 with 1 abstention vote resulted, which, in short, again, affirmatively recommended the changes. So that was the basis of my point when we spoke previously, was that in order to advance that affirmative recommendation, requires simply a majority of the quorum present and voting.
Not what Mr. Andrew stated April 3rd in the minutes that are in record?
That's correct.
So that would be inaccurate.
That would be inaccurate, yes.
Okay, if I might say something about the surfacing, please?
We're not on surfacing, we're just...
Well, the surfacing has to do with the corrective text amendment, which is on this ordinance.
Okay.
It has to
Is
do
it-
with the amendment of Article 11.
Is it included in this, Mr. Gage?
I think I can address that. The amendment at hand is taking 3 uses and moving them from conditional uses to permitted uses. And those 3 uses are accessory and temporary uses, signs, and off-street parking and loading. The actual paving standards are not part of this ordinance.
Right. Yeah, so that would be at a later time that you would need to comment on
Okay,
that.
why are the paving standards not included in this, if that has to do with the off-street parking?
This is a zoning ordinance that pertains to uses, the parking lot
Right.
as a use, but it does not, this portion of the ordinance does not regulate the paving standards.
The
That's in a
construction
separate section that's not being amended at this time.
The one deals with the construction or the building of, and the other deals with the use thereof. And we're dealing with the use thereof on this.
Yeah, maybe the easiest clarification is when you say use, it's whether you can do something, and construction is how you do it.
But isn't the verbiage being changed, the language? You're amending the article to put back certain language? Is this not the same thing? Because if the language remained the same, it's my understanding that the grandfathering law had to do with this specific amendment change, because it has to do with off-street parking.
I'm not sure I understand your question, but what I can tell you is that at the moment, prior to the adoption of this amendment, accessory and temporary uses, signs, and off-street parking and loading within a public educational facility subdistrict are conditional uses. This amendment would make them permitted uses in the public educational facility subdistrict. So if the question is whether parking as a use should become a permitted use, that's what's on the table today. If it's paving standards, asphalt, concrete, the grandfathering of gravel parking lots, that is not part of this ordinance.
Okay. I can bring that up in other matters. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, later on today?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mayor, just real quick for the benefit of the public listening regarding the minutes. As you already know, as a governing body, we do not take verbatim minutes. For those listening, that would mean we don't have minutes that characterize word for word every word that every participant would say during a discussion. So I'm pretty sure they've looked at our minutes before, but generally what our minutes are intended to do is to cover the actions, and there is some fill-in of somewhat important verbiage. Sometimes it's paraphrased because we don't do verbatim minutes. So there really is no expectation to be able to look in our minutes and find a verbatim discussion between anybody, any parties, in our minutes. That's just simply not the style of minutes that we have. I don't know that we've ever done that, quite honestly. So, yeah, there would be an expectation that if someone had a conversation that certain things would not be included in the minutes because we're not going to characterize every single word, because generally speaking, that's not what our minutes are intended to do. So that might be helpful for those watching.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I move we adopt on second reading ordinance 12-10667.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve on second reading ordinance number 12-10667. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Angel?
Aye.
Commissioner Crawford?
Aye.
Commissioner Householder?
Aye.
Commissioner Shirley? Aye. Mayor Jennings?
Aye. That motion carries 5-0.
Item 8.3, authorize Salina Country Club treated wastewater effluent reuse system cost share.
Ms. Tasker.
All right. Thanks, Dustin. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. The direct reuse of treated wastewater effluent is a widely accepted and well-tested approach for watering public parks, athletic fields, golf courses, and so on. Utilizing treated wastewater effluent can reduce the demand on the potable water system, including our groundwater aquifer, and during periods of drought or peak demands, and we're fairly familiar with drought right at this specific time. Effluent reuse has been considered in the city's projects for the last 20 years, with the first being in 1993 when the East Dry Creek Interceptor was constructed. And basically, the East Dry Creek Interceptor brought flow from the treatment plant out at the Schilling Air Force Base. It was abandoned into the wastewater plant. And this is the city's main wastewater treatment plant and only treatment plant today out on the northeast side of the city. And at the time, these two force mains were constructed under the Smoky Hill River at this location. While the river excavation was in place, a 12-inch line was installed for future effluent reuse. So that was nearly 20 years ago. The second was in 2009 when the raw water supply study was completed and several different types of effluent reuse were looked at that time, which included landscape irrigation. Some of the sites that were discussed was Billbrook Park, East Crawford Recreation Area, Great Life Golf, which was previously the Elks Country Club, the Salina Municipal Golf Course, and the Salina Country Club. Many of these facilities use groundwater for their irrigation, so the ability to use treated effluent in lieu of groundwater would definitely be a plus for the groundwater aquifer. In July, a study session presentation for the Salina Country Club treated wastewater effluent reuse system for turf irrigation was presented. And at that, basically, we had 3 items that we looked for direction from the City Commission on. The first was to allow wastewater treatment effluent to be used at the Salina Country Club. And the second item was to submit our project description to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, which we've done, and we've met with those, and there really are no specific permitting issues to prevent us from moving forward with the project. The third item was the decision of the city's participation in funding the upsizing of the pipeline from 6-inch to 12-inch. And basically, to kind of help you understand that better, there's a wet well located at the treatment plant site that would pump through a dedicated line the treated effluent at this time up to a tank that's located up here right along North Street for the Salina Country Club. And the portion of the line that had the potential for both public and private use was the line from the wet well over to this southwest corner of Eastboro Road and North Street. At this point, that portion of the line would continue on for the Salina Country Club as a private line, and then in the future, the potential would exist to carry this line on to the south towards the city's municipal golf course and athletic fields. At the time of the study session, the estimate for the city's share was $70,750. Since that time, Wilson & Company has been retained by the Salina Country Club to complete the design of the project. Staff members from Wilson & Company, the Country Club, and the city have been holding bi-monthly progress meetings to discuss the project. The routing and design of these dedicated supply lines have been basically our topic of discussion. To be a little more specific, in the event if this portion of the line would remain as public use, that would allow that line to be located in our dedicated permanent utility easements and would allow the existing 12-inch line under the river to be utilized. In the event it was a private line only for the Salina Country Club, they would have to utilize an area outside of our easement, and have an additional crossing under the river to accomplish their project. And basically, as we spoke of that, we determined that to design two separate dedicated pipelines, one being public, one being private, would have a added cost in design fees of a minimum of $7,500, which would be paid by the Salina Country Club. Staff requested that Wilson and Company contact contractors and obtain current costs for the installation of both the private and the public lines. And at that time, as we went through the cost, we've determined to upsize from 6-inch to 12-inch would be $54,582. And again, that's just this portion of solid line, trying to cut you in two, Gary, sorry, from the wet well over to the southwest corner there. And we have taken a look at their estimates, which were in your packet, and we've compared those to competitive bids for several projects, and we believe these estimates are right in the range of what we'd expect to see. And based on that, the Salina Country Club and the city recommends that a fixed amount of $54,582 be utilized for the city's participation decision. By doing this, we can avoid that additional $7,500 cost for the Salina Country Club. So in general, the fixed amount of $54,582 is roughly $16,000 less than the estimate we presented at the study session. When we look at the total project cost, it was roughly $405,921, and that's a pretty accurate number. Based on that, that's with participation from the city and the country club. If it was a country club project only, the total project cost would be $351,339, and the difference is that $54,582. And in general, the pipeline that we would install there has an anticipated life of well over 60 years. We've seen that many locations throughout the city. And as the drought continues and water becomes more and more valuable, we feel that effluent reuse will be a viable option in the future. It's just a matter of time when it makes sense to use that water as opposed to treating the public water, then utilizing it for irrigation. A separate agreement will be executed with the Country Club to define allocation of operation and maintenance costs and the fee structure for the treated effluent and any other applicable requirements. We've been gathering contracts, and they're fairly lengthy and a lot of issues to talk through and work through in the future. And a budget allocation of $75,000 for the city's cost share of the Salina Country Club treated wastewater effluent reuse system is proposed in our 2013 capital improvement program under the category of system enhancements. Staff offers the following options for the City Commission's consideration. Option 1 would be to authorize Salina Country Club treated wastewater effluent reuse cost share at a fixed amount of $54,582. Option 2, not approve the cost share. Or Option 3, modified cost share as directed by the City Commission. Staff recommends Option 1. I would like to also let you know that David LaFrance, General Manager, and Mike Hulteen, Superintendent, are here from the Salina Country Club, and all three of us would be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions of staff?
Just this, Ms. Tasker, and when we had talked about this before, had we also talked about our ability and the country club's ability to recoup some of their costs should down the road other entities? I just want to maybe put that on the public so the people at home can kind of...
And that would fall under other applicable requirements. I look at it as similar to what we do with wastewater pump stations.
Sure.
When we allocate a cost for someone to utilize the benefit of that pump station. That would be the same here, and that would apply to the city as well as any other entity that might find a use for the effluent.
Sure. At this time, has there been anybody expressed? Has, for instance, Great Plains obviously seems the closest to that. Have they, at this time, expressed any interest?
At this time, that
probably a
hasn't.
little early in the game anyway.
A little early in the game. Once we have the facility there, I hope the closest city facilities would be on Crawford. And at some point in time, we may have a water line that skirts the area that would make that favorable. So,
good.
Excellent. Any other questions of staff? Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item? Sir, if you'd state your name and address, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Coltine. I'm the golf course superintendent at the Salina Country Club. I'd really like to thank you all for your consideration and the opportunity to address you. This is a project that has been in the works for a large number of years, better than 6 years. As Martha stated, the need for this is unfortunately becoming very very well demonstrated by the droughts that we are experiencing. It's not an uncommon project, or excuse me, uncommon practice at all to use the gray water for this type of use, and it would seem that it would be to everybody's best interest to look down the road and plan for the future. Some of this has already been in place by the city's earlier action on the 12-inch line in place, and we would feel that it would be a great benefit for us to participate in this as well. Also, one other thing I might bring up, the $54,582 figure, if that were to be, the project was done by the city of Salina only, it would actually probably cost $150,000 for the city to do it alone. So our participation has made that look that much more attractive, I think. So again, thank you for your consideration, and I would strongly request that you would approve this.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other public comment? I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and action.
Mayor, I move that we authorize the Salina Country Club treated wastewater effluent reuse cost share at a fixed amount of $54,582.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the Salina Country Club effluent treatment system cost share for the amount of $54,582. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion carries 5-0. Before we move into 8.4, we'll have other business just in front of that. Ms. Hernandez, if you want to come back up. Before you explain your full concern, I want to make sure that everybody understands what item it is you're talking about. When you said something, it made me think that it was the item of gravel parking that was discussed, seems like 3 or 4 weeks ago, something to that effect. So I just want to know from staff, before there's a lot of time of discussion, is this a timely discussion? Is this the right place, the right time for comments on that? There was a text change that was presented to the commission previously, right?
Right. There was a text change, I believe, in April of this year, and Mr. Hernandez raised a question a few weeks ago. Staff then reported back the outcome of that at a more recent meeting. So I don't know what the nature of the question is, but I think as it relates to Mr. Hernandez's questions, we reported that information back to you previously.
Okay. So we'll just hear it, and then if we need to direct staff to look further into something, we can. Ma'am?
Okay, this has to do with the text amendment. With the surfacing, it was, if I'm understanding correctly, it was removed, the grandfathering clause was removed, and then it was put back because they said that it was an oversight or an inadvertent error, and I'm addressing the commission on this. It's not something that I wanted to bring to the commission in this type of forum because my overall I guess my overall discussion has to do with all of the discrepancies and errors having to do with the staff, and this is just another example that something went through, you approved it without knowing all the facts behind it. So if this is not the correct form, I totally understand.
Well, I understand your comment that there was an error that you just communicated, and you wanted us to be aware of that, but
Yes.
I don't know what all would you like us to discuss on that?
The error has to do with, it's numerous errors, and it's what I brought up to the Planning Commission, the staff, et cetera. And this one particular change that was made to amending the surfacing, at one point it was, in 1990, it was determined that the grandfather clause for gravel needed to stay in. In 2006, the staff decided that they wanted to take it out. The staff is saying that that was a mistake and that was an inadvertent error. That was an oversight, that they didn't mean to take out the gravel clause, meaning the grandfathering clause. And the information that I was going to present to you tonight was that I don't believe that to be true, because there was too much discussion, as well as in the minutes, having to do with the reasons for them wanting to specifically remove the grandfathering clause. Now, when they put it back in, they said they put it back in on an emergency situation because it was an error, it was a mistake, it was an oversight. But it was not an oversight because they gave 5 reasons why there shouldn't be any gravel. And they also specifically saying that that gravel creates problems in different arenas. But the staff also spoke about the fact that their goal was to eventually take care of all the gravel and make sure that all areas were paved. So if those type of things were decided upon and discussed, then this is just another example of why did this go through? Why are you changing things just because the staff is saying that that was an oversight? And these things are important.
Yeah. Commissioners, I can address that very quickly. If, first of all, I think I want to make it said that staff can represent their own perspectives, and we don't need someone else to do that, because when someone else usually tries to represent the perspective of another person, many times they're wrong because they're not that person. They don't know what they were thinking, and they shouldn't probably indicate their thoughts about that. With that said, though, the mistake came up because I saw a development occurring where existing development was demolished, a new development came in, and the whole lot was, for the most part, all but a small section was gravel. And I asked the question in our zoning code why you could, in a zone, have a completely different use and then all of a sudden not have to pave that, not bring that up to what I would believe to be a modern zoning code. And the response was, well, there is a grandfathered mechanism, and that's why, and so forth. I said, okay. The more we talked about it, we then went to the book, which is always a good thing to do, and we found that it had been inadvertently left out. So staff took the initiative to put it back in. Doesn't mean we have different thoughts about whether it should or shouldn't be. We can have thoughts, and they change over time, too. Sometimes you run into a scenario that causes your thoughts to change about a particular topic. It's fair and it's reasonable. In that particular case, I had concerns that our zoning code was pretty lax, quite honestly. But what we first said is, let's just reset it back to the way it was before, because that was the most important thing, is to recognize the mistake and then put it back the way it was before, and then take whatever time that we would need to actually address what we want to do with parking from a broader perspective. That's exactly what happened in that scenario. And quite honestly, if staff had purposely taken that out, wouldn't we have wanted to leave it out? I would have, if it was me. I would want to leave it out. I wouldn't want to change my mind later and then put it back in. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but that's basically what happened with that scenario.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I understand your concern. I mean, your thoughts are that we're having these big discussions, we're voting a certain way, and then just out of nowhere, staff is coming up and saying, we're going to change this ordinance, but I don't think that's what's happening here. I think what you may be seeing is kind of half the picture and not, again, this was something that you basically brought up, and I would concur that I don't think we want completely new reused structures having gravel parking lots. We're trying to move away from the 1800s and get into at least the 1900s and have some paved parking lots, so I can understand where your thoughts on this would come from. And probably in your research you discovered that this small little omission had occurred and it wasn't malicious intent. It was a true oversight in the initial ordinance. So I think maybe a more important thing here is to understand that in the effort of efficiency, a lot of this is taking place, and that mistakes can occur, that they're not intentional, and when they do crop up, this was a 6-year-old, 7-year-old mistake, that they're taking care of it, and it was brought back before us, I think, wasn't it? Was it not, once you guys modified that, I think?
Yeah, it was brought back, and quite honestly, from my perspective, if, let's say that I don't like gravel parking lots, I'd like to see it upgraded to a solid surface. It would have been easy just to say, hey, let's just leave it alone, they don't know the difference, right?
Right.
But we didn't do that because we recognized it was just a simple error, and it needed to be fixed, and then you have a public debate on whether you want to change a policy or in zoning code, whatever it might be, and so that's
Right.
what occurred.
Right.
And would that error have affected many people that would have been told that they would have had to pave their parking or pave their driveways?
In this case, no, because quite honestly, staff hadn't even realized that there was an error in the book until this particular situation. So in essence, what was probably being applied, I couldn't tell you specifically how many applications would have occurred in which this was brought in from the point that it was taken out in error and then put back in intentionally. But in essence, it would have been administered in practice the way everyone actually thought it was in the book before we said, hey, this has been left out, let's fix it. So it wouldn't have changed the past practice at all.
So nobody would have been, somebody would have come through that, you wouldn't have addressed anybody saying, hey, you need to pave your driveway because that's what the ordinance calls for.
Correct.
During those 6 years.
Correct, because staff had not realized it was an error. So no, we were applying it in practice the same way we thought it was still in the book. So that's when I saw the example of the one development and was asking about it, and we realized then at that point it was an error. We immediately fixed it.
Yeah, I think it would have been the opposite of what you're saying. I think more than likely, things that should have been paved may have been left gravel. I don't know that that happened either, but that's more of the concept. It defaulted back to the gravel being allowed more so than, I think it was more lax than what it should have been.
Yeah, if anything, again, not knowing examples of what occurred at that time, if anything, it would have been more lax than the code would have read at the time, but it would have been in accordance with the practice and the code prior to that time.
Right. And at this point in time, I guess I would just say that we have a staff that works for us, the 5 commissioners, to prepare knowledge and information. We receive our packets Thursday before we review the items, and if there's mistakes made, which, we know there's even mistakes made in a doctor's office, although we would hope they don't occur there, that we rely on staff to come back and to correct those. And I think we just had item 8.1 that seemed a reconsideration of something, so there was a transpositional error. And I would like to say that we do expect, but can't fully demand 100% from staff, but we would expect for them, when they notice things that have been done in error, that they come back to the commission so we can have our ordinances and policies and procedures corrected and done right. But at any point in time, it is up to a commission member to say, I don't have enough information, we're not going to look at that. It seems like this changed on this, but the intent was to change whether or not you can display hours, but a use was changed, so we rely on the commission to have knowledge and ability on every item that we vote on. So ultimately, we take a lot of that responsibility on ourselves. And staff realizes that, and that's why when mistakes happen, they come down with a lot of heavy feelings, because they're serving the commission and they're serving the citizens. So I would encourage anybody, any commission member, that if you do have any question about that surfacing ordinance that was done in the past that Mr. Hernandez spoke about, that you ask that of staff, and if there's an issue there that we need to look into, we certainly will. Yep. Okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mayor, may I
Sure.
add a quick point along the line of what you just spoke of? I think, just so everyone that might be listening would be fully aware, the city of Salina does handle its own codification of ordinances. That's a significant responsibility. It's a significant cost savings for that to be done here. But it is a big responsibility, and you can imagine that every time you meet, something affects that code. And I think our clerk's office and everybody involved does a nice job doing that and keeping that up to date. What I wanted to make sure everyone understood, I have never been presented with a situation, nor would I ever advise anyone associated with the city. We do not touch that code unless it's based on your action. In the example of the ordinance earlier, would have been an easy fix to slip in that, west 70 feet or whatever it was. Doesn't happen, won't happen. We don't alter anything you do. If we find there's been an error, we bring it back, and we allow you to address it. And I just wanted to assure anybody concerned that it's not a question of, well, did the city commission change the code, or did the staff decide one day they wanted to do something? That just does not happen. Nothing close to that. So,
Thank you.
I have great confidence, too, in the staff.
Yeah. So to that, we'll get our sheet on the executive session up here, and then we'll move into item 8.4.
It's coming. It's coming.
Did that to me last week, too.
started at 15.
And in the meantime, we just want to remind anybody that's still hanging in there with us that on December the 9th, from 5 to 9, at the Blacksmith County Bar, Country Bar, is the benefit that was spoke of earlier at the beginning of this meeting.
Okay, may I move we recess into executive session for 20 minutes to discuss the legal counsel matters subject to attorney-client privilege for the reason that public discussion of those matters would waive the privilege and adversely affect the city's interests in those matters, and recess into the executive session to discuss confidential data relating to financial affairs and trade secrets of a corporation for the reason that public discussion of the information would competitively disadvantage the corporation, and reconvene at 5:10.
5:15, probably.
5:15?
5:15.
Okay, 5:15.
Second.
Motion and a second to move into executive session for trade secrets and legal reasons. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Do we expect any action?
We do not.
We are now in executive session.